Hello lovelies, welcome back to another video. My name is Gemma and today I'm going to be talking about some tips and recommendations for non-fiction newbies. Okay, so I want to caveat this video before I even start by saying I am not any sort of expert or prolific non-fiction reader. I am quite new to non-fiction. I've been actively seeking it out for probably about 18 months now. And I just thought I'd share with you some of the things that I have found useful in learning more about non-fiction and where to start and what sort of things have worked for me. They might not necessarily work for you, but hopefully there's something in here if you're feeling a bit intimidated by non-fiction and where to start. So I suppose the first tip I can give you is pick up something that has a subject that you are interested in. It sounds really obvious, but I know people can be a bit overwhelmed with non-fiction and feel like to be a non-fiction reader you must pick up a certain type of book, whether that's huge histories and scientific books and all those sorts of things. Non-fiction comes in so many different shapes, sizes, and is targeted towards all different demographics and age ranges, and there is literally something for everybody out there. So don't feel like to be non-fiction you must. I mean, when I was younger, my definition of non-fiction was autobiographies, and I hate autobiographies. So I never read non-fiction really for a very long time, outside of, you know, the fundamentals of biochemistry at university. But yeah, so I never really picked it up. It's only, like I say, in the last couple of years that I've started to realise that actually there is more to non-fiction than biographies and large science textbooks. So yeah, that would be my first point. Think about what you enjoy learning about. I know a lot of people enjoy learning more about the medical profession, for example, and there are loads of things out there that aren't medical textbooks that will give you an insight into how medicine works in the country that you live in or in other countries. So yeah, that would be tip number one. Tip number two, if you do find that the reading of non-fiction is feels quite laborious, or that you struggle to get into it because it's not a story. Firstly, there is narrative non-fiction, which is told more in a story type way, that you can pick up, which is generally what I tend to read. The other option is still to pick up narrative non-fiction, but to listen to audiobooks. So I listen to quite a lot of non-fiction on audio. I find it a lot easier to digest when someone is talking to me rather than me reading it. I think it's from years of my non-fiction learning. Sorry, I'm doing this a lot today. My non-fiction learning being from a textbook where I read a paragraph and then I write notes, and then I read a paragraph and I write notes, or I'm looking for a certain specific piece of information. So I do find it easier to listen to, generally, not always, generally. So if you are feeling like you want to try some non-fiction, but you're not really sure that you want to pick up an actual book, I highly recommend listening to them on audio. And I always feel really, really productive when I'm listening to a non-fiction audiobook and doing something else, like driving to a meeting 3 hours up the road, and I'm like, well, I've just learned whatever I've learned on my way up to that meeting, so it wasn't a waste of my time. So yeah, that would be my second tip. Tip number three, start off with shorter non-fiction books. There are a lot of non-fiction books that are under 300, under 200 pages, that will just give you a flavour of what that sort of style of non-fiction is, so you can see if you like it or not. So yeah, I would say, you know, if you're looking to try non-fiction, probably don't go and pick out a 700-page history of the British Isles, for example. Next is try to experiment with the different forms that are available. I've already talked about obviously listening to books on audio, and I've talked about narrative non-fiction, but there are so many different ways that non-fiction can be presented to you. So for example, I talked about this on my channel the other day, but I've just finished reading Mouse, which I will be wrapping up shortly. This is a non-fiction memoir told from a son's perspective of his father's experience in Auschwitz, and this is a graphic novel. So that's a very different way to pick up non-fiction. Yeah, I really enjoyed that experience. There's also non-fiction that's presented in the form of a diary. For example, Anne Frank's diary is obviously presented like that, so epistolary works. There are more and more essay collections which will obviously talk about a subject from a variety of different views, which is an interesting way to attack a subject. And memoirs. There is a difference between memoirs and autobiography. It is minute, but usually memoirs tackle a certain point in someone's life. I also find that I prefer memoirs if they are not written by a celebrity, because though you may think a celebrity is interesting, when they write their memoirs, they leave all the interesting bits out. So yeah, memoirs like, for example, Educated by Tara Westover, those sorts of things are really interesting. I am going to do some recommendations at the end of this video, but that's just an example of a great memoir that I read last year. And finally, the last tip I can give you is just to experiment, just try different things, see what works for you. Do not be afraid to DNF. This is like my new mantra this year. If I don't enjoy it, just DNF it, because what is the point in wasting your life reading a book that you do not enjoy? So if you try something and it's not for you, that's fine. Put it down, try something different. Don't let it discourage you, because as I say, there are so many different types of non-fiction out there, in subject matter, format, writing style, all of those things, that you will find something that vibes with you, and I find it really rewarding to read non-fiction. Not all the time, but a little sprinkling of it through my reading, I find it really rewarding, because I feel like I'm learning more from it. That's not to say that you can't learn from fiction, which you absolutely can. But yeah, that sort of wraps up my tips and tricks for for picking up non-fiction. And as I say, those are just things that have worked personally for me. I'm not saying they'll work for everyone. I'm also not saying that I'm an expert in the matter. There are some really fantastic booktubers out there who read a lot more non-fiction than me. Editing Gemma here. Sorry, I did mean to mention a couple of channels at this point. Two that I really enjoy going to, or three actually, for non-fiction are A Book Olive, Triumphal Reads, and Brittabola. So I will link all their details below, but all three of those read quite a lot of non-fiction, and I get some really great recommendations and ideas of things to try from their channels. So I highly recommend checking them out. So I'm going to move on to a few recommendations of non-fiction that I thought was really, really accessible. I'm just a standard person. I didn't, I studied biology at uni. I didn't study anything else. So any other subjects, which are generally the ones that I want to pick up, I need them to be accessible. I don't need to be bombarded with jargon and technical language. So I've got 4 here for you that I felt did that really well and gave a great inroad into non-fiction. So the first one I want to talk about is This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay. So this is, I suppose, memoir come diary told in like short snippets. So Adam Kay writes down things that happened in his day as a was he a resident doctor? As he was working his way through the training scheme of becoming a doctor in the UK, and the things that he encountered, and effectively why he now isn't a doctor anymore. And it is really eye-opening. There are some really funny bits in there. There are some very, very sad, heartbreaking bits in there. It's not very long. I did read this physically. And yeah, I'd say if that's the sort of thing that interests you, that's a really good place to start. He did also have a sort of follow-up book, which was Twas, the Nightshift before Christmas, which sort of focused on shifts that he did over Christmas, because doctors never get any holiday. So yeah, I would highly recommend picking those up if you're interested in sort of the medical profession, and sort of real life stories. But as I say, they're in nice short snippets, so you never feel like bombarded, and there's always a good place to stop. The next book I'm going to recommend is another memoir that's told in narrative prose, and this is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. So I picked this up earlier this year. I actually had an ARC from NetGalley, so thank you NetGalley, and this was fantastic. So this tells the story of a young black boy in America who is gay and trying to come to terms with his sexuality and the effect that that has on the relationships around him, and his relationship with his parents and his friends, and how he discovers himself and discovers what that sexuality means to him. And it was exquisite. It was so beautifully done. This is actually a YA novel, though to be fair, I didn't think it read like YA at all. It was just very accessible, very honest, very raw, and it opened my eyes to a lot of things that I wasn't aware of. Obviously, as a white woman, I wouldn't have any idea, a straight white woman, I wouldn't have any idea what it's like to be a gay black man. So I just thought it was really interesting, and would highly recommend picking that one up. The next book I'd like to recommend to you is A Life on Our Planet by David Attenborough. So I think David Attenborough might actually be my favourite human that has ever existed. He is an extraordinary person. I mean, how old is he now? Is he 90-ish now? And he wrote this book like last year. He is still campaigning tirelessly for the planet, for wildlife, for ecosystems, and he does it in a way that presents opportunity. He's not saying, you know, you fucked it, you're evil incarnate and everything's ruined because you have a microwave. So this book is structured really interestingly, because it's sort of at the beginning of each section, it sort of goes back in time through his career, and it says that in the 70s how much carbon was in the air, how much wildlife there was, all those sorts of things. Sorry if you can hear running around, that's our friend Rudy. And so it was really interesting the way he broke that down. I listened to this one on audio, and honestly, David Attenborough could read me the dictionary and I would listen to it, because his voice is just... But this is a very intelligent man who has an amazing aptitude for talking to people. So I would highly recommend picking this up as an audio book, because he gets his point across beautifully. And the last one I'm going to recommend is another one that's told in snippets, and it deals with some pretty serious topics, but it has a lot of comedy in it. And that book is 52 Times Britain Was a Bellend by James Felton. So as you can expect, you have 52 different topic areas, and it goes through all the times Britain was an utter bellend over the course of history. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are many more than 52 times that Britain was a bellend, but this did really open my eyes up to some of the ridiculous stuff Britain has done over the years. Some of it obviously very serious, But it just gives you snippets of these things that then you can go, oh, I'd like to learn more about that, and pick something else up afterwards. So yeah, I would recommend this one. It is very light-hearted. There's not loads of detail in it, but it does give you a flavour. So yeah, so those are the 4 books that I'd recommend as easy sort of starting places. If any of those subject areas interest you, obviously, if you're not interested in any of those subject areas, then I wouldn't recommend picking them up. So yeah, so this was just supposed to be a bit of a chatty sort of catch-uppy video, and I wanted to do this because it's non-fiction November this month. So lots of people hopefully will be picking up some non-fiction, and yeah, that's me. So I hope it was of some use. It certainly wasn't supposed to come across as sort of condescending or anything in any way, just literally sharing my experience of getting into non-fiction. Okay, cheers guys, bye.